Hello, this is manic.mercurian with your solar return reading, and I did want to say happy birthday. This is basically a birthday gesture. It's a reading for someone who is very close to me, so happy birthday, and I hope you have a great trip. And for anyone else who may be watching this, who may be wondering, like, what is a solar return reading? What is that? I'm going to briefly explain what that is, and then from there, we're going to get into the actual reading. And if you want to skip around, feel free to do so. I'm going to put timestamps in the description so you can use those at your leisure. But yeah, so basically, what a solar return is, it's kind of what it sounds like. So it's the moment that the sun returns back to the place it was when you were born, relative to the ecliptic. So in other words, astrologically speaking, it's when transiting sun conjoins your natal sun. So for instance, this person was born with sun at 1 degree Virgo. Every single one of their solar return charts will always have sun at that exact position, 1 degree Virgo, 1 degree and 18 minutes specifically. Okay. So it's kind of just a neat, handy, kind of easy way of seeing what themes you will experience for that year, basically, starting with one birthday and continuing on to the next. And honestly, I do start to notice these themes of each solar return kind of beginning to fade into the picture as far back as a month or two before the actual solar return moment, if that makes sense. So there's kind of like a build up there. And then for the actual solar return itself, it can occur as far away as it's within 24 hours from the moment you were born. So it can occur a day after or a day before your birthday. Okay, but if you are interested in getting a reading like this one or maybe a different type of reading, definitely check out my website, manic.mercurian.net, or you can email me, manic.mercurian@gmail.com. I always put that information in the description of my videos, and I will link my website at the end of this video as well. Okay, but now that we've got all that out of the way, let's actually dive into this chart and see what is going on for your next year. So again, like I said, sun is at 1 degree Virgo. We're not going to get a whole lot of meaning from that because that's how it always is for your solar return charts, but we can look at the house of the sun and then the positions of the other planets, of course. And I do find that the ascendant and the moon are particularly revealing with like the overall kind of mood for your year. So in this case, you have Libra rising with Sagittarius moon. Libra rising would indicate that the main focus of the year, your main intentions, goals, desires, they are all surrounding like social interpersonal relationships in your life, specifically one-on-one partnerships. Now, people's minds tend to go toward like romantic relationships, and I would definitely say that is true. That is like the one main focus. So in other words, this year you may be focused on a particular partnership in your life, maybe something new that has happened recently. That is kind of the overall focus. That's where you are, you're most captivated. That's where you're putting in your time, energy, etc. So yeah, that's the main focus. And to a lesser extent, this could just apply to other, parts of life as well. It doesn't have to just be all about one person. It could be about, your social relationships in general, partnerships, friendships, all of these things you may be, taking more seriously, but also having more fun with, and just overall focusing more on the relationship part of your life. Moon in Sagittarius adds a much different layer to this. Moon in Sagittarius, it's a fiery energy. It's very adventurous. It's very cheerful, very upbeat. So that kind of adds, a very, optimistic outlook to your year. So you may be feeling very gregarious, a little bit more outspoken than usual, outgoing, adventurous, trying new things, traveling maybe, things of that nature. So it adds a really kind of sunny, bright, cheerful, celebratory disposition onto this chart, I would say. Especially combining these, both of these, Libra rising with Moon and Sagittarius, both are very different. What they have in common, though, is that both are ruled by benefics. So in other words, both of these are pretty positive, optimistic, cheerful energies to deal with. Both have to do with abundance in some kind of way. One is more pointing toward abundance with social relationships, social experiences. The other is more pointing to abundance when it comes to the expansion of your knowledge and soul through adventure and things like that. But yeah, that is the one main link that I would see, is that both point to you kind of being, optimistic, looking at the glass half full this year. So that's definitely fun and good, I think. However, to take this in kind of a different turn here, honestly, when I pulled up this chart, the one thing that I noticed that really stood out to me was Mercury and Venus are retrograde here. Mercury's retrograde in Virgo, and Venus is retrograde in Leo. And the reason why this is significant is because, for one, these are both inner planets. So inner planets have a lot to do with your individual experience. We tend to notice them pretty viscerally, because we tend to view things on a day-to-day level. We have a very immediate, focus that way, generally speaking. So for one, having two inner planets retrograde, that in itself is powerful. I'm going to explain what that means in just a moment. But before that, another reason why this is very important, though, and very strong and kind of dominating is because of your chart specifically. So for you, in this chart, Venus rules the ascendant, since the ascendant is Libra. So Venus is the chart ruler. That gives it elevated status and makes its themes that much more important. And again, we're going to talk about those themes in just a second. A little bit more jargon first, though. I'm sorry. But the other thing, with Mercury rules over the sun. We already said, you have sun in Virgo for these charts. You have sun in Virgo natally. So Mercury rules over the sun. Therefore, both Mercury and Venus are kind of a big deal in this chart. And with both of them being retrograde, retrograde energies tend to, as you probably know, when planets are retrograde, things get slower, more thorough. Yes, there is the reputation for things being more dysfunctional. But I always say they don't have to be more dysfunctional. Retrograde periods are excellent for resting, integrating, let's kind of slow down, unwind, let's process things, let's look back at, maybe things that have already occurred and get a greater understanding on those types of things. That's a really great outlook that tends to happen with retrograde periods. Retrograde periods are also really excellent for boosting intuition. When we are embracing retrograde energy, we're not seeing things linearly, as we are supposed to in a kind of like industrial capitalist world. We're supposed to go from A to B to C to D, being very productive, thinking and doing everything in a very linear type of way. But with retrograde energy, that's really just not how it works. We're kind of all over the place. We're jumping around, and it's much more about intuition and creativity, spirituality. It's much more excellent for observing, the subtleties of life and things like that, And I always say it's not that one approach is better or worse than the other. It's just different. With these retrograde energies, I do think that they have a bad reputation because most of us aren't born with retrograde energies. Planets like Mercury and Venus spend much more of their time direct than retrograde. So that's why it could be difficult for you to embrace this if you don't have these energies in your natal chart. And also just in general, most of your solar returns aren't going to be like this. They're not going to have Mercury and Venus retrograde at the same time. So in other words, this may be an unusual year in the sense that, you're really slowing down. You still have that adventurous side of you. We covered that with Moon in Sagittarius. But with Mercury and Venus retrograde, those are really important, really impactful. And it's showing that, you're really looking at things differently this year. You're really processing things, contemplating things, thinking outside of the box, And again, this is really excellent when it comes to creativity. I think thinking outside the box is a great way to put it. Really just, I don't know, open to looking at things in a different way. Like, what is the context here? What's the underlying message? Things like that. You may be much more creative this year and much more functional when it comes to, I don't know, reading between the lines, being intuitive, having your intuition boosted in a lot of ways, things like that. So on the one hand, that could be uncomfortable. It may be unusual for sure. I do think retrograde energies can also make things a bit bizarre, strange, unusual. But again, on the other hand, this could be very great when it comes to creativity, thinking outside the box, and also slowing down and processing things in order to understand your past much better. Okay, so yeah, honestly, that's kind of a heavy energy, but could be very interesting, very productive for you this year. And since we've already talked about, most of the inner planets, let's mention Mars real quick. So Mars is in Virgo in the 12th house. Mars, as you probably know, represents your ambitions, your drives, your goals. It can also be a bit sexual at times as well. Mars is like this warrior energy. For you, Mars is in the 12th house. Mercury as well is in the 12th house too, so we can talk about that. Whatever's in the 12th house ends up getting kind of hidden. It's sort of subdued. It may appear that its energies are completely absent, but in reality, it's not that they're absent. It's more that, they are kind of offline. They're more spiritual, more intuitive. It sounds a little bit like retrograde energy, I guess. But in other words, with Mars and Mercury in the 12th house, Mars representing your drives, Mercury representing more the mental energy, learning, communication. All of these things for you may be subtle, covert. With Mars in the 12th house, what you are ambitious for may be kind of obscure. You're not really sure exactly what your goals are this year. You're not sure what you want to be ambitious for. And the things you are ambitious for may be kind of very abstract. So, for instance, you may be fighting for a state of mind, peace of mind. Rather than fighting for like a very concrete goal, like we're supposed to, I guess you could say, goals are supposed to be clearly defined so you know when you achieve them. Traditionally, this year for you, it's not going to so much work like that. Your goals may be more abstract and more difficult to define. Fighting for an emotion, fighting for, you may also have more of a drive when it comes to like spirituality, maybe valuing your emotional health more so, which is, obviously great. I think that's, a big part of what leads us to astrology and things like that. But again, how do you define that? How do you go about that? How do you know if you have achieved that or not? It's these things really aren't very easy to define. So that could be potentially a struggle for you this year, but there's always a plus and a minus side. Mercury as well, I touched on. Mercury being in the 12th house shows that you may be learning more about spirituality or learning more about kind of like abstract or kind of weird concepts this year, or coming across strange information that you wouldn't normally be open to or wouldn't normally come across. Also, your method of communication and the way you're learning, it's in a very strange place this year, because like we said, Mercury's not only retrograde, it's in the 12th house at the same time. So this shows that you're completely thinking outside of the box. You're thinking about spirituality, intuition. You're not thinking how you normally think. You're not looking at things the way you normally do. Typically with this kind of mental, intellectual energy, like I was saying before, it's typically linear. It's very, logical and A to B to C. And for you, this year, it's going to be much more intuitive rather than logical. And it may be, you may be learning a lot and communicating a lot, but in ways that are, again, kind of subdued, covert, or there's something like mysterious about all of this, if that makes sense. So definitely some weird stuff there to unpack for sure. But yeah, fighting for abstract goals, fighting for spirituality, spiritual health, emotional health, things along those lines. Okay, and then let's kind of just briefly go through these other points, and I like to briefly go through the outer planets in these readings. First of all, midheaven is in Cancer, and I believe you were born with, Libra rising, midheaven in Cancer. So these energies are not foreign to you. They are easy. In many ways, you work with this energy your entire life. So this is going to be something familiar to you. Midheaven in Cancer shows that you take on almost like a motherly role at work, in the world, in public, in your career. You have a nurturing energy. This is really great for like management, but it's also great for working with homes or families, things like that, where you're definitely a leader, but you're leading through emotion, if that makes sense. So again, this is something that you kind of always do. You are already like that, but this is just lining up with the solar return chart for you this year. So you may take on an extra motherly role at work. caregiving, supporting others. This could be really great for like training people, helping others in some kind of way. And again, it could be really great for management as well because the mother is kind of like the manager of the family in a way. So applying that to your workplace, although in some ways it's kind of backward, it actually works pretty well, I think, for being a manager, being a leader, something like that. Not being a leader in the sense that you're like completely running your own company and you're the CEO or something like that. Although I guess again that could work, but I picture more of like kind of a manager type that is within a larger structure but is taking care of their team, that kind of thing. That could be the role you're playing with your career this year. I do think it's interesting you have Jupiter and Uranus in the eighth house. Eighth house has to do with partnerships, and it has to do with trusting others, relying on other people, especially when it comes to like living situations or financial situations. This definitely applies to like roommates or people that you're living with, but it also applies to bank accounts. Like it's basically, who are you investing in? Who are you depending on for your long-term financial security? Things like that. So roommates, family members whoever you're living with, but also banks, stocks, things like that. And having Jupiter and Uranus there is pretty interesting because on the one hand, these are pretty volatile, especially when you put them together. So that could point to huge swings, huge ups and downs in your financial situation. Again, stocks, bank accounts, debts, inheritances, as well as, roommate agreements. All of that could be very up and down. I do think it would be more up than down, though, because Jupiter is, a positive influence. It brings about abundance. Its energies are easy to work with, so on the one hand, Jupiter can make things dramatic, bringing ups and downs, but it tends to be more positive than negative because it is, it's fortunate, it's fortuitous, it's an abundant energy. But bringing that with Uranus, combining Jupiter and Uranus makes things unpredictable as well. So having both of those there, it's going to be kind of a wild ride, I would think. And I say this not to scare you. I just think that, maybe we could all approach these things with caution. I think that's never bad advice when it comes to our, long-term agreements, our investments. Definitely investments financially, but some of this has to do with emotional investments as well. Like, what are you really counting on? What are you banking on when it comes to other people or organizations and your long-term stability, basically? Those are areas that could be volatile. So maybe just be extra cautious this year. That would never hurt, I don't think. Your South Node is in the first house. So interestingly, so South Node is in the first house, but it's in Libra at the same time. So that would mean that you are focusing on yourself, but it's sort of backward. It's difficult for me to interpret or put into words. You're focusing on yourself this year, but what you want is a relationship. What you want is that partnership. So yes, you're focusing on yourself this year, but you're choosing to do that through your relationship. That's how you want to explore that. In a way, that's how you want to assert your individuality, is through your relationship. That's how that works. So yes, on an abstract astrological level, it is kind of backward because it's about you, but it's also not about you. It's about another person. It's about those partnerships in your life. That's what you really value. That's what you want to invest in. That's what you want to have fun with. So that is, that's how that goes, I guess you could say. On the flip side, North Node is in the 7th house in Aries. So I know both go kind of hand in hand. It's showing that you're comfortable asserting yourself and kind of just doing whatever you want through other people. And then on the flip side, an area of potential growth and abundance would be something similar yet opposite. And this is hard for me to read also, so I'm sorry. But North Node in 7th house Aries. This would also be about individuality, but in a way that is like honoring other people. So honestly, that's kind of hard for me to read. But basically what I'd get from that is an area of potential large changes and growth for you this year will come in your self-expression, your individuality, your identity, as well as, in relation to your relationships. A big part of your identity is your relationships. I think that's true for anyone, but perhaps especially for you since you have Libra rising. So in other words, this is an area of huge change. How you express yourself in terms of, your relationships. How do you choose to go about those things? How do you flaunt your individuality through your relationships? All of that could be an area of dramatic change for you this year. And this change is not necessarily good or bad. I think it's good in the sense that you're growing and learning. That can be uncomfortable at times, but it tends to be kind of an adventurous energy here that I'm talking about. So definitely not something to be afraid of, I don't think. And super briefly, I'm just going to go through Neptune, Saturn, Pluto. Pluto is in 4th house Capricorn. Being in the 4th house, Pluto is intense, and it tends to bring about insecurities. And I want to say it's a volatile energy, but at the same time, it can kind of make us stuck. It's such a heavy energy at the same time. And that's the energy in your 4th house. So 4th house has to do with home and family. So this could bring about like intensity or insecurities with home and family, which is kind of an uncomfortable place to put those things, right? We want our foundation to be secure and, not a place of intensity. But, on the unfortunate side, that could be an area of intensity, or it could bring about darkness, insecurities, maybe things from the past. Those types of things may be conjured up in your home situation and or your family. So that is dark. That is, definitely not fun, but it could be productive in the sense of, bringing up this kind of darkness, bringing up the bullshit, so to speak, dealing with it, and then like shedding it and moving on. That's ideally the process with Pluto. Okay. And then Saturn is in 5th house Pisces. 5th house has to do with children, as well as like creativity, creative pursuits. How do you express yourself creatively? Through, like art is a great example, or it could be something you do through your work if you're passionate about your work. Whatever it is, whether it's children or creative pursuits, Saturn is there, so it's showing that, that could inhibit these types of things. You may have delays or extra challenges, extra burdens, extra responsibilities in these creative and child-related areas of your life. So yes, that also doesn't sound fun, but it could be good in the sense that you may be taking on more responsibility, really taking these things seriously. When we have Saturn in the 5th house, we tend to be really serious, especially when it comes to like children, for example. So I don't know like how much children play a role in your life really, but again, it may not have to do specifically with children. It could also have to do with like childlike energy, which we all have on some level, the playfulness. This could also have to do with romance to some extent, and this is not really, this is the type of romance that has to do with, being in love and just having fun. This in itself is kind of playful and in a way kind of childlike, I guess you could say. Not in a bad way, of course, but in these areas, you may actually be kind of serious and thinking like, okay, where is this going? Like, let's make sure this is truly something real and long lasting. Yes, that could be a challenge. It could come as a delay, but at the same time, this could be great for, having a realistic, mature kind of outlook when it comes to how you embrace, the childlike, playful part of your life. And then very last thing I'm going to talk about, because this is getting kind of long. I like to keep these short because I tend to find that although this may sound contrary, the deeper I get into analyzing every little point in a solar return chart, I find that it actually tends to get less accurate. So I like to just do a brief overview of the chart like this. So last thing I'm going to talk about is Neptune. It is in 6th house Pisces. So with Neptune in the 6th house has to do with your health. It's like the maintenance of life, I've described it as. So it's not a fun part of life, but it's things that we have to do, like go to work, pay your bills, take care of your health, things like that. Not really fun to do, but it's essential for making life fun, I guess you could say. It's the responsibilities. With Neptune there, Neptune makes things confusing. It makes things, kind of just shift unexpectedly. It's hard to define these things. And, you can see where I'm going with this. Putting that in your area of health and life maintenance, it may make things confusing where, your health could kind of just seem to change for apparently no reason this year. Um, you could have really good health and be feeling super great and have no idea why, and then suddenly that changes and goes into something else. I wouldn't worry about it too much. Obviously there's no point in worrying really. Neptune does oppose Mars, so so Neptune opposing Mars, that could indicate that you are again confused about what you're fighting for, which we already kind of established that. But you may become like irritable at certain times this year and have no idea why. Or what else? Or there could be some kind of like accident. I hate to say, and I'm definitely not wishing that, but I say these things because I believe that they can be avoided through astrology. That's why. So I'm not wishing these things into existence, or I don't want to be a doomsday prophet. But yeah, these things can be avoided. So, for instance, Mars opposing Neptune, especially with Neptune in the sixth house, this could point to like mental stress, a mental break, issues with mental health that are, could make you kind of irritable or angry, but it's kind of confusing to pin down, like, what am I angry about, or why do I feel this like aggressive energy, or do I feel like someone's fighting me, but then who's fighting me? What are, it's kind of abstract, and even talking about it may sound very strange. It may make sense like maybe later in the year. But Mars also has to do with violent accidents too. I hate to say all this, but as much as I hate to say it, I would hate more not to say it, I guess you could say. Mars can have to do with violent accidents, so connecting that to Neptune in your sixth house. In its worst form, I could see a violent accident happening that could threaten your health, and it could be something that's confusing in nature, or Neptune also has to do with like liquids or toxic things like that. But at any rate, in its lesser form, I would say, again, this could be avoided. Having these kind of like radical, weird planets in these areas. You could always just approach these areas with more caution. I mean, just like we talked about with your house, the eighth house of income. That's one answer to this, like, if I have something pointing toward, an accident or an issue with health, I'm just going to be more careful with my health this year and more, measure things out or calculate it or whatever. That's one way to go about it for sure. Otherwise, yeah, I mean, that's really all we can do, right? But otherwise, again, with Neptune, I don't view it as a wholly negative thing. It tends to be overall neutral. Like I said, you could be feeling super great this year and just have no idea why, as well as feeling not so great. It's just going to it seems to just kind of change on its own. And on some level, we have to just go with it and embrace it because, again, Neptune makes things confusing. What you have to do for your health may not be clear cut. It may not be understandable this year. So on some level, you have to just kind of roll with the punches, just go with it. Things are just going to be shifting for apparently no reason, and we have to just do the best we can, and just like do your best and forget the rest is something I've heard. So yeah. So I do apologize if some of these outer planet energies did seem darker in nature. I want to go back to the basics super briefly before I finish this though, because although a lot of what I talked about may have sounded dark, the overall coloration of this year is, I don't think it's dark. This year may be a bit strange, a bit wacky, because of these retrograde energies. But overall, Libra rising, Sagittarius moon, overall, it's still a cheerful, abundant, positive year. Like, maybe you won't believe me after a reading like that, but honestly, that is the focus. It looks like a year where you're having fun, focusing on relationships, but also adventurous and maybe interested in kind of seeing things from a different way, being open to kind of weird avenues, things of that nature. So if you have any questions, of course, let me know. But in a nutshell, that's what I see for you for this year. So I hope that helps or was interesting. And again, anyone else who wants a reading, you can click the link should be showing on the screen right now. But yeah, again, happy birthday, and hope you enjoyed this reading and have a great time.